Hi, my name is Mark McGregor, and shortly I'm going to be joined by Marlon Dumas, CTO and co-founder of Apromore, and well-known and leading academic in the areas of business process management, process modeling, and process mining. So one of my favorite quotes, a single conversation with a wise person is better than 10 years of study. Now, here I'm using the Toffler example, whether we say it is a Chinese proverb or whether we use Wadsworth long. There's a whole bunch of different attributions, but the principle stays the same. And I've been very fortunate over my career to get to spend a lot of 1 hour segments with some pretty wise people. So I'm really looking forward to spending today chatting with Marlon and learning from his experience. And hopefully we'll all get to learn something and you'll find this useful too. So to Marlon, if I've seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants, says Isaac Newton. And many, many giants of our current state and of the future will be able to say that they were able to stand on the shoulders of our guest today, Marlon. With over 25 years experience in that process management, process mining, process model space, many, many people that you've heard of actually can trace a lot of their learnings back to Marlon. And indeed, as he'll talk about later, one of his friends, one of my friends, colleagues, mentors, former bosses, Gero Decker at Signavio, was actually had Marlon as his supervisor for his masters. So it gives you an idea of how small or how tight the world is. Now, before we jump into the conversation, this is a long video. So it's over an hour long, and I know that some people like to jump through and move things through quickly. So I've actually provided you with a little bit of an index. So if you want to skip along to particular topics or come back, jump back, then this may help guide you through it. But I think, and I hope, that you find it interesting to listen to all the way through. So without further ado, I'm going to jump straight in and thank Marlon once again for joining us and say, Marlon, can you provide us an overview of AI in the context of operational excellence? And what is the current state of the market today? Because there's much being written, but what is the current state of play?
So I think that the question asks for a little bit more than generative. I probably should start. Let's start from the foundations in a way. So it's to understand this topic, it's important to start from the foundations. The state of the art as far as operational excellence support is data-driven operational excellence. It's really like you look at your data, say of the past hours, days, months, and you come up with some summary of what is the current state of your process at the macro level, at the micro level, depending on what kind of decisions you want to, operational decisions you want to drive. So what does AI fundamentally changes with respect to that equation? And I will then go through the layers. It's important to see this from a layered approach in a way. So now naturally, one of the things that AI can help you to understand is why your business processes are behaving in the way they are. If there is a change in performance, what are it can diagnose the underlying causes or possible causes of that performance, right? So that's the first point of AI. That it tells you, it gives you indications of why things are happening rather than staying at a purely descriptive level. On top of that, it can then tell you what is expected to happen. What can you expect to see in the next week, in the next day, in the next week, in the next month with respect to your process if you don't change anything. So that is the whole predictive component. And third, it can give you recommendations based on the predictions and the causes for the performance variations. It can give you recommendations on what to do next. Yeah, what actions can you do and when to improve your process on a continuous basis. And there is all the the whole area of prescriptive AI. And finally, what we are seeing, and coming to your topic, Mark, about the impact of generative AI on this equation, is the ability to then combine, so make you look beyond the process that you are trying to optimize and trying to bring in external knowledge about the semantics of your process, about how other organizations are tackling similar problems to you, and recommending you and then recommending you adaptations to the process driven by experience from elsewhere. That's what you get in a way when you open your generative AI bot and you start asking questions about, in my P2B process, I'm having this and this and that. What can I do? And the AI can then recommend you to do things based on what? Based on crowdsourced knowledge out there, right? Of what others are doing in similar situations.
A couple of things I want to pick up on with you there. Absolutely understand looking through the data, so where does the AI come into what you've just described? Because when I look at what you're talking about, looking inside the data, that just looks like a data-driven prediction stuff. Doesn't look like anything different from what I was doing with Six Sigma using Minitab and statistical analysis 25 years ago. So why is that same stuff now being labeled as being AI and machine learning and all of those things, when actually it just sounds like it's just another language for data-driven?
Yeah, it has to do with the scale of things, and that's where the organizational challenges come into play. So you could diagnose the issues in your process with statistical analysis tools. Sit down a team of very smart analysts and look at your process, and they will dig into the data and find statistical relations and tell you this is where the defects are coming from, this is where the late deliveries are coming from. Yeah, and then you get round trips in a matter of weeks, if not months in some cases, if you have to go down to interviews to kind of come up with like, this is what we're going to do. So the change cycles that you can get with traditional data analysis approaches are relatively slow. What AI gives you is that you can get those diagnoses, you can get those predictions, you can get those recommendations now, or you can and then that is where the organizational challenge raises, and that is why I think that the move towards AI-driven or AI-augmented business processes is slower than many organizations might hope for, and is more challenging. It's because as an organization, what the AI is giving is just more recommendations than what you could get before. And if you are not able to absorb those recommendations into your processes, if the AI is spitting thousands of predictions per minute, is spitting hundreds of recommendations per minute on what to do to improve your service process, you need to be able to absorb it, or else you are back to the Minitab days and your analyst telling you every couple of weeks or every 3 weeks what adjustments you could make to your process, right? So we are no longer talking, if you look back at the Toyota improvement cycle, we're no longer looking at that kind of cycles with AI. You're looking at much faster improvement cycles, and that's where the challenge is. You need to change the way you run your processes in order to make the most out of AI. Otherwise, you will just get more recommendations that you cannot follow through. You need to run your process more predictively. You need to run your process more preemptively to take advantage of predictions and recommendations, and less reactively, which is more the traditional way to do it. I wait for the customer requests to come in, and then I start acting upon them, right? You need to be more predictive. I will not wait for the customer complaint to arrive. I already know that it's coming, and I will act accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, and this brings me on to, as you know, one of my favorite topics. It doesn't matter whether we talk about process mining, business process management, process improvement, enterprise architecture, all of them that said, actually, we need to make the switch from being outcome driven. Instead of looking at saying, hey, let's optimize this process in the hope that it's going to provide what I might want at the end, then start with the end and say, what is the desired result? And then work back from the outcome to say, okay, now how do I optimize to deliver this outcome? Or how do I predict a failure that may prevent that outcome? And I think that for me is where it becomes interesting to see, well, how is AI, ML, generative stuff going to help me work smarter to work backwards from the outcome rather than start from the input? I know it sounds crazy to start from an output. We've all been taught process, start with the inputs, do these various methods, produce an output. Whereas we now know that actually that's sub-optimizing the whole. What we need to do is to start with saying, what is the desired outcome? And then work backwards from that. Now, when we do that, exactly to what you've just said, we don't need to run an NPS score. We don't need to run NPS surveys, because if we say that the outcome is 100% on time every time, and we do it, we don't need to survey. We know the customer's going to be happy. The only reason we need to survey is saying, well, we've got this process that may or may not deliver what you want. We just need to run a survey and see whether you're happy that it delivered enough of the time, sometimes maybe. So how does this stuff really help us when we take that outcome-driven approach as opposed to the input-driven approach?
It actually, that is the whole point, is that if you want to exploit the capabilities of predictive and prescriptive and generative AI, you need to become outcome-driven. Yeah, it's like what you are gonna do, because you see, in traditional process optimization, you will be looking, again, let's go back to the analysis, looking at processes and a population of thousands or hundreds of thousands of cases, and trying to find in there patterns of what makes a case go late. Yeah. And then, it's happening for these kind of cases when they reach this stage, and we do this mistake at some point in the triage in the case, and therefore this happens later. Hey, let's go and look and improve the way we do the triage. Now, AI is making not only the recommendations arrive faster, but it's making the diagnostics and the recommendations arrive at a much finer granularity. It enables you to personalize your process, to potentially look at every case on its own as an individual with its own characteristics. Yeah. And if you are in a situation where you have a technology that is looking at every case as an individual and making you a prediction based exactly on those cases and making recommendation based on the characteristics of that case, then whatever process you have is going to stop you from exploiting whatever fixed process you have, will create friction when exploiting those recommendations, because those recommendations will essentially make you deviate with respect to the process. Yeah, and you do something that you would normally not do at that stage. So that is the second organizational challenge, is that to fully exploit AI, you need to say the process will come will be built on the fly. The process may be different for different cases. Yeah, depending on what we're predicting, on what the circumstances are, and what is my only point of reference is the outcome. It's like I must deliver on time, within a certain cost target, with a certain quality characteristics, and you will see more emphasis in a way on capturing that outcome, rather than capturing the process that leads to that outcome.
Okay, so which leads me to a couple of interesting points in my mind that said, okay, so based on that, would it be fair to say that through the use of AI, and whether we use outcome-driven or goal-driven approaches, then we fix the issue that has been going on literally since the days of TPS and all of those things around the quality movement, where the focus was constantly on efficiency and not on effectiveness. I mean, you know that from my own work that I've been a real believer that we should stop focusing on efficiency. Just because this is the cheapest way to produce it doesn't mean that it's actually the most effective way, because it didn't take into account the outcomes and outputs. Effectiveness is saying, okay, what's the cheapest way to deliver what Marlon wants when he wants it? So it sounds to me like what you're suggesting is that the AI, machine learning, all of those kind of things actually makes it easier for us to pursue the pursuit of effectiveness over traditional efficiency. That's not saying that we're not going to be efficient, but we're going to be effective. So that for me is kind of interesting. But also something else that you suggested there, which I thought also was fascinating, is that are you suggesting that when we take the outcome-driven approach or goal-driven approach, that we go into a mindset of forget that old concept of happy path and actually say, actually, there are many, 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 many paths, and actually it's which path is required to deliver that particular outcome for that particular group of people.
Right. Yeah, and you're very right. And the end result is what I would call the stratification of your processes. So we used to think of, for example, a customer service request handling as a process, right? But in reality, it's like a lot of strata of processes in there. Yeah. There are like different customer types. There are different claim types, different amounts involved in each of these, say, purchase orders, if that is what we are handling. There are different regions, etc. And then you cannot, if you want to exploit AI, you cannot think about these processes as being monolithic. What you will do will differ depending on the type of case. Yeah. And beyond the level where you can go and say, for these cases, we'll do this, for these cases, we'll do that, and capturing it in some decision table, blah, blah, blah. The AI, to explore AI, you need to go beyond that in a way. So in a way, you need to say, every case is different. Like in medicine, yeah, every case is different. Every case needs to be looked into. You don't you sneeze and you get a prescription. That's it. Oh, no. Well, you are an individual. You have your own characteristics. You have your age. You have your weight, your medical history record, and the decisions are taken on a case-by-case basis. So that's the extreme, really. So you need to think there's certain goal that I need to capture. There's certain outcome that I need to I have to achieve, and there are resources to achieve it. And every case is different, and that is what the AI challenges to do. And therefore, you will get more personalized process execution if you want to exploit the AI. Because if not, what is the point that you have an engine that is telling you, for this case, this will happen, and for that case, this should happen, and here you should do this, and here you should do that, if your process is monolithic and it's not stratified, right? So you need to stratify it. That's exactly, for example, going back to the medical analogy, that's exactly where the thinking in personalized medicine is. We cannot go to the other extreme just because we don't have an understanding and a way of managing a fully personalized medicine process. Yeah. So we might be just giving the wrong medicine to each person because we cannot comprehend that process. So the intermediate is a stratified medicine. And I think we're going to see also stratified processes. everywhere else where the outcome is very important. And that's many services processes. So you're going to see that instead of capturing like the process, and maybe you have a backbone of the process still, you're going to be spending more time capturing your strata, using the AI itself to figure out what are the groups of people in there. In fact, in banking, they are already doing that. For example, marketing departments are talking a lot in the banking sector about micro segmentation. Yeah, coming up with small customer segments and having rules to treat them differently. Yeah, so that's where we are heading off. In a way, the financial sector has been quite aggressive, driven by the pressure from fintech to go in that direction, and you're going to see it becoming much more widespread. So you need to be thinking in terms of microsegmentation, stratification of your processes, and going beyond this monolithic thinking that you have a claims handling process or a motor claims handling process for that matter. So you don't have it.
If we stay with your personalized medicine example, and I think that's a really good example, and we can actually look at law as well, I think. And if you think about lawyers going to court, they're always looking for precedent and case law. So in my mind, what I'm hearing is saying, look, on one level, we're only able to do what we were able to do before, e.g. present an example case or an example personalization. However, historically, that personalization has been limited by what is the knowledge of your doctor in front of you and the books that he reads, the number of hours in a day that he can read, and his area of domain knowledge. In the case of lawyers, and let's look at some of the big tort cases that have gone in historically in the US and the class actions. What we're really saying is how many hundreds or thousands of hours is someone willing to pay for legal clerks to be going through books looking for previous thing? And the answer is, well, obviously not a lot. Okay, so if we accept that in the process domain, that has also been the limitation. How many workshops can I run? How big a sample can I actually crunch? What's the knowledge of my business analyst or my process analyst? My domain expert, again, is all narrow. So are we saying that what we're doing is not changing anything with AI, except now we've imagined, same with your personal medicine, now we've got a hospital full of house. All right, so every doctor has got a brain the size of house and the diagnostic ability of house, and every single case that's ever been is now available at their fingertips. And that all we're really saying is they now have access to a far wider body of knowledge and to draw from, and can get those answers in a far more timely fashion, so that when you and I arrive in the emergency room, they can actually get to that diagnosis in time to save our life, as opposed to saying, well, if only he'd lived for another 25 years, we would have actually been able to comb through all of the relevant knowledge.
Yeah, so you're spot on. And so let me give you an analogy. So you have a customer service process, right? And it used to be that you will grab you will try to put your customer service guidelines and all your tips and tricks of how to answer to different people in a bunch of books, booklets, and then these people had to read through them and try to memorize as much as possible. And when a request comes by, maybe they still need to sometimes go and check, what does this say? Or what does that say in there, right? And with experience, and they could grab a certain amount of that in their head and put it there. And you say, you have a very experienced customer service manager, possibly with some less experienced ones below, in teams, and every team is like a house and it has its knowledge, right? but then you get like how things are handled by one team is different from the other. One team might be performing much better than the other with respect to one metric or another metric, right? So the disruption that generative AI gives to you is the affordance of the possibility, of somehow putting all of these into a central brain, which is the generative AI, yeah, upon which all the case handlers can tap into, yeah, which somehow has two effects. Somehow it reduces the advantage of the expert to some extent, superficially, and it allows the less experienced one tapping into that knowledge to potentially perform as well as a more experienced one. That's what is happening at the moment with writing using chatbots. Already early studies have shown that it makes the weaker writers attain the performance of stronger writers. Yeah, but it doesn't help much the stronger writer, but it helps a lot the weaker writer. So that is one of the disruptions that generative AI is coming. If you want, we went from this paper, manuals. We went to an intranet where you could search and find the frequently asked questions and tips and tricks. That's the search engine revolution of the late 90s. Yeah. And now the generative AI brings it like now you can query that knowledge base in your own terms as if it was, a central brain, a central human being talking to you. So that's a big disruption, and is of course going to disrupt a lot of customer service processes. But it comes with a disadvantage, is that little brain in the center is not very reliable. Yeah, so it can spit the right recommendations for treating a given case as much as it can be spitting the wrong recommendations for treating a given case. Yeah, and that's where experience and proper knowledge management and governance will have to come into play. Yeah, and not just do blindly what the generative AI is recommending to you, but have a rules and processes in place for how you exploit it.
So that suggests that you're saying that when we come to the generative and the chat GPT type stuff, then actually it's more human than we think, right? In terms of very few humans are willing to say, hey, that's a great question, Marlon, but I don't know the answer. We see that as a strength in a human being, as opposed to many other human beings who feel they have to give you an answer even when they don't know what they're talking about. So it sounds to me like chat GPT is performing like the average human being, not willing to say, I don't know what I don't know.
In a way, yes, that's the problem. It's like the ChatGPT doesn't know to tell you, I don't know, in a way, or doesn't do it often enough. Yeah, it still tells you something. Yeah, and that's because fundamentally it's a probabilistic technology, and not only is a probabilistic technology, but the complexity of the algorithms that are behind makes it that it is not able to reliably quantify its own uncertainty. Yeah. So if you are honest, and that's where honesty comes from, it means you are able to somehow quantify your own uncertainty. You know that you don't know, you know that you are unsure. Whereas generative AI in its architecture does not have a foundation for quantifying the uncertainty of its answer, or even more, to decompose its answer into what it actually knows and what is actually extrapolating. Yeah, so that's it. So and concretely, it will mean that you when you use, if we go to the generative AI layer, that I was mentioning before, that comes with additional challenges related to, which are knowledge management challenges, related to how you are going to process the recommendations that it's giving you in light of the uncertainty that those recommendations have, and an uncertainty about the uncertainty of those recommendations.
Are we moving to a world where, to a certain extent, I don't want to say the process is irrelevant, but let's just say in that world of customization, that it actually isn't about hardwired process? And we talked about the dynamic processes, which of course Jim Siner talked about many years ago in automation, dynamic self-healing processes. But is that then saying actually our process or business analyst, domain specialist need to focus on the activities? So that are there key activities that need to take place in order to deliver particular outcomes? Are there rules that constrain or enable those things? Four eyes principle, whatever. The categories of user, as we've talked about, well, hey, it's, you know, important customer, less important customer, different variants. So is it a case of categorize what we need to be having the skills at around the categorization of the users and customers, knowledge of the activities and rules, feeding that information in, and the process becomes whatever the system decides is the process that's going to most effectively enact all of the required activities, ensure that we're not doing any unrequired activities, but stay within any rules or regulations which it has to adhere to, and then suddenly it will create, let's call it the, gee, how funny if we call it the transaction chain, because then we're going straight back into actually all the process mining really uncovers, I call it the accidental process. It's really the activity chain. And suddenly we're back round full circle saying, oh, actually, we weren't really worried about the process. We just needed to make sure what the correct activity chain or transaction chain is for this particular case to deliver that required outcome within this framework to that group of people.
So I think you're right, and we're going to be moving away from modeling the to be process, or modeling the to be executed process, which is something we've been practicing for a while. Even when you migrate to an ERP system, there comes these reference models that you instantiate and you say, this is how we're going to do the process in our new ERP or CRM system. And exploiting AI will require us to challenge those assumptions and to say, no, you cannot say how the process is going to be executed normatively in advance. All you can do and where you should focus is on framing the process. So I think we're going to replace a lot of modeling the to-be process with framing the to-be process. And the emphasis should be, as you say, in framing, the emphasis is not on specifying or pre-specifying what are the paths you will take for different inputs. Yeah. So it's input driven. It's rather about, like, given the outcome, what are your constraints for achieving these outcomes, your regulatory constraints particularly? What is it that you cannot do? Yeah. What are the non-functional requirements in terms of costs, constraints, budget constraints that you have, your policies? Yeah. And then what are the activities that the human resources can perform within this process? Yeah. And then you need to allow the AI to operate within that frame, and to recommend you different things, different next steps for different people. Yeah, taking into account the characteristics of those people. Now you can frame a little bit more if you go and do some micro-segmentation and you say, for these cases, we'll put in some additional constraints on what you can do. For those cases, we'll put it on some additional constraints. But you will not go and say, for all cases, we are going to do that. I think embracing AI means finishing with this concept that you can say anything about for all cases in my process.
And I'm just thinking as you're talking that through, that maybe what we're getting back to is genuinely managing the process and not managing the procedures. Okay, so we both know in that workflow scenario, everyone talks about workflows as being a process. Well, they're actually not. They're actually procedural, right? Because if we don't say exactly what happens and in what exact order, then we get a blue screen. And it's a level. We're actually not modeling a process. We're actually modeling the procedure. And I often use the example of writing a book. So if we think about it, there are activities involved. We've got to pick a title. We need to know the audience. We need a publisher. We need to write the draft. We need to get the reviews. There's a whole bunch of things that we need to do, activities that need to occur in order to publish a book. But it really doesn't matter whether you choose to start with a title and then start drafting, or whether I start drafting and then find a publisher. The order of many of those activities really doesn't matter. However, the book does need to be complete before it can be printed. And it does, and you know what? It doesn't even need to be printed, of course, before it's sold anymore, because in the on-demand publishing, said, oh, actually, we could, right, okay, so there's many activities that are required in order to have a complete selling book. And there are suggested pass-through, but it's not a procedure. Conversely, when we're working on decommissioning or putting in fuel rods into a nuclear power station, these are highly prescriptive. These are not, well, it's optional to do this activity before that activity. No. You will do this, then you will do this in a procedural manner in order to avert a big explosion. So actually, what we're saying is, or what you're saying is that with the use of AI, we can get back to managing at the process level and stop working at the procedural level and pretending that the procedures that we've been playing with for the last 20 years since BPMS really came out were process, because they weren't. Because to your point about the strata earlier, when we come up, oh, actually, I can still write that process. Customer service, I can write a generic process. Receive request. Deal with request. Complete request. There we go. That's the process. Now, how each of those steps is executed, I don't know or care. But at the high level, strata level, I can define a process. It doesn't change over time. It's not tied to a technology, and it's not overly prescriptive where it doesn't need to be. So I just wonder actually whether what you're describing is, hey, we're going to get back to genuinely managing at the process level, whether we think of it as value chains, whether we think it as level zero, forget the language for a second, but we're going to get back to managing at the genuine process level and stop playing and getting confused at the procedural level.
Yes, it's gonna blur the boundaries between tactical process management and operational process management. And by tactical process management, I mean all the design and the planning that goes into it. So in not all organizations, but in many organizations, there is a very strong tactical process management layer, and that is very focused, or perhaps too focused, on what is the procedure that we will follow. Standardization. Because traditionally specialization is expensive. A standardization makes you more efficient. Therefore, an emphasis on tactical process management and taking in advance decisions about how all cases will be handled, right? What AI does, and here you put the finger on the crux, the essence of it, is that it makes specialization cheaper. Because you have an engine that can be looking at the characteristics of each individual case and combining that with knowledge of previous cases and external knowledge in the corporation, as well as crowdsourced knowledge, to make a sensible, possibly optimal recommendations on how to handle that particular case, right? So, and that means that there's going to be much less of like less emphasis on establishing the procedure that all cases should follow at the tactical level, more emphasis on constraints. What are the KPIs we are trying to improve? And using that to frame the process, what are the capabilities of our human workers? And then moving much more into the operational management layer. And in terms of like, this is what we're going to do today for this case or for that case, based on the recommendations that the AI is giving to us as we speak. Yeah. So that's basically the shift, is like more weight on the operational management, managing the process today, some less emphasis on design, particularly procedural design at the tactical management level, and much more emphasis on the framing of the process, as well as at the operational level, much more emphasis on monitoring, because of course, you need to, keep an eye on what is the impact of all these interventions that you are doing because of your AI recommendations.
So it is, wow. So actually, if I want to get to true operational or business excellence, it seems to me you're suggesting that this is a technology that lets me get away from the minutiae of getting trapped down in the weeds, and actually enables me to be genuinely managing my business, my enterprise, and all of those things, if I want to go for the excellence at the true business operations level, not the technical operations level, by providing insights, monitoring, and having me focus on the business questions rather than the detail of process. I mean, that seems to be what you're suggesting.
Yes, it is. From a business stakeholder perspective, from a user interface perspective, that is precisely how it looks like. It's not you enter into a process management method or a space of process management methods that are more towards what are my business objectives? What are the outcomes I want to achieve? What are the constraints to achieve those outcomes? What are the KPIs that I need to trade off between when I run my process? Yeah. And managing more of that and monitoring more at that level, rather than thinking too much in terms of this is the procedure that will be followed. Yeah. So the procedure that will be followed in a more a proactive process is determined as things unfold. And this is, again, you are putting your finger on a very important a prerequisite to be able to absorb AI technology in the organization, a cultural prerequisite, which is to think less normatively, think less that there's a small set of people that have all the truth of the world, or the process in this case, in their heads, and more in terms of like, it is at runtime with all the information we have that will be determined what will be done next. Yeah.
We're crunching all this data, and we can potentially do all these interesting things. However, I'm curious because privacy and confidentiality have been big key topics in the area of process and task mining. But it seems to me that when we come to AI, that we've got even, particularly generative stuff, we've got even bigger issues around IP and copyright and the such like. And I find it really confusing as to how I'm going to use these technologies inside my firewall versus just searching the internet. How do I protect my own confidentiality, and how do I ensure that I'm not using stuff I shouldn't be using? I mean, how are we going to be doing this stuff?
Yeah. So let me unpack that one and talk first about confidentiality and then about privacy, right? Confidentiality, at least at the business confidentiality level, it's something that will come fairly soon as the commercial offerings evolve. We're going to go from just standard contractual terms that tells you effectively that, oh, we will keep your data confidential, we will not use it to keep training our model, and whatever IP is produced out of your prompts is to the maximum possible extent yours. That's the standard contractual clause at the moment. Yeah, to much more sophisticated contractual clauses to fulfill different confidentiality requirements, including the ability to take the AI model into your private cloud, right? And then to enhance it with additional layers or refine it through additional layers with your corporate knowledge, and then be able to customize it to your needs and within your own framework. And that will take care of a lot of the confidentiality issues, because at no point in time your data is going to the AI provider. So you can ensure that your AI is protected better than you can at the moment. The IP is going to be a very interesting issue as we move forward. There's going to be very sophisticated and unpredictable case law that is going to be built, and new legislation that will have to come to deal with the question of IP of generative AI. That's a big thing. I don't think we are in a situation to make any predictions at this stage about it, right? Always, in a certain way, you should be, in the meantime, treating the output of the AI as you would treat the output of a search engine, right? So, you know that you cannot just blindly go and take it if you cannot assert where that IP comes from. You have to take it as a suggestion. You have to build your own knowledge, which, by the way, you probably anyway need to do because of the unreliability of the output. So there's like two reasons why you should be treating your AI as a search engine rather than as another employee in your organization. There is the uncertainty, the unpredictability of the error in the generative AI. And the second reason is because you actually don't know where that came from, where that answer came from. Yeah, so and you potentially could be getting into some IP issues if you are just blindly using it. Now, the privacy issue is going to be a very contentious one. There are going to be very complex legal cases around, for example, right to be forgotten in the context of AIs, of generative AI, potentially, some private information being leaked in some way. Yeah, particularly when you take to the AI and you start, specializing it with data from your own organization, and that could potentially then lead to the AI spitting back some private information. So it's going to be a very contentious issue. Again, what can I say? That the best protection you have is to always, when you embed the your AI into your enterprise systems, you have to treat it as a sophisticated search engine. Yeah. So it is taking certain data, and that if that data contains private information, PII, you should be treating the whole processing chain and the consumption chain under the terms of that PII, that private information. So you have to. I think that's the best protection you have to protect yourself while all these contentious issues are being resolved.
When we look at all of the hype around AI and particularly generative stuff, as to whether this is going to help demonstrate why we're going to see the hype way before the reality, because actually if we're in big corporate land, then the things that you just illustrated there are so wrapped up with risk and the risk officers and the compliance teams and the legal teams that someone says this is in the too difficult pile. We'll worry about it in 3, 5, 7 years time. And so actually what we'll see is that those issues around copyright, privacy, PII, etc., are not easy. And in fact, they're so difficult that actually what it may mean is if you're a Fortune 500 company, the risk is too great to actually make full use of this stuff, and you're just going to put it in the one day maybe pile. And when we look at the more adoption curve, we're going to find that actually they say, I've got to be a laggard. I can't be a leading. It doesn't matter how exciting it seems. The risk is that I'm too big a company and I'm worth going after. It's the old story, isn't it? If your company's small enough, it's not worth suing you because I'm not going to get anything out of it. However, if you're a high profile, it's worth coming after you because there's a big potential win there, hundreds of millions, etc. So it'd be interesting to see how that slows.
Yeah. But there is a way to manage that, or to at least conceptualize that risk, and it is this: like in the late 90s, early 2000s, if you remember, it was very trendy to deploy your intranet and to put a search engine on top of it, right? Yeah. So you made the search engine index certain documents in your organization, and then people in your organization with certain access rights will just query that information and get search results and click it. And that's technology that we are very used to, and there's a very good understanding of what it can do, right? And you could also take a search engine that also takes some external information and make it part of your intranet as well. What generative AI can give you now is like that search engine, that internet search engine, manipulating concepts, if you wish, instead of manipulating words. Yeah. But potentially along the way processing private information and spitting it back. And if you just think about, there is a box that is indexing certain information that might be PII and that produces some output, and that's going to be consumed by people, then, well, those people need to have access to that, need to have been able to see that PII. If you think about that, then you can frame your risk management questions around generative AI.
You talked earlier on about the advice, and we've talked about the advice that we can get from AI, but in operational excellence, whether I use internal consultants or external consultants, I already get a whole bunch of advice. So how is that any different in getting my AI driven advice from getting my internal or external consultants, whether I've used a McKinsey or an Accenture, or whether I'm using anyone intern? They've already given me 3 choices. Now we're saying that AI is going to give me 3 or 30 choices. So actually, how is it any different from what I currently do today? How do I evaluate it?
In a way, it's worse. It's finer grained and it's faster, right? So you will get more advice and finer grained advice. That's what it gives you. So instead of telling you, You can redesign your process so that cases like this get routed that way. It will tell you for this or this case, or for this group of cases, rerouted that way, because of their state, their characteristics, etc. So it brings a potential choice overload into the equation. And you then need to redesign your processes to be able to manage those kind of inputs. It's not like you can take your existing process and you can just plug in a prescriptive or generative AI component that will recommend you how to route individual cases and then just deploy it, and that's it. Because it involves a very deep, fundamental people and culture changes, moving from a mentality of there is a process, and this is how the process looks like, to a mentality of there are cases, like we wanted to think of in the days of case management, and each case is different, and there is a certain frame upon which cases should be managed, but every case is potentially different. So that is the difference with respect to the old days. Is time and granularity have changed with generative AI, and to the extent that you cannot just continue managing your processes in the same way if you want to exploit these technologies.
And I wonder, as we get towards closing and we remember that, never mind your 25, 30 years of broad experience around business and process improvement, but you are sitting there as a co-founder of Apromore, a process mining company, and particularly around the simulation. And I just wonder whether the way to break through and make those decisions is, the fundamental thing is, well, actually, the way that you help make a decision between all of those choices is by stop reading the words and start looking at the numbers, and actually come back to, well, that's why you need to make data, let's say data informed decisions, not data driven decisions, data informed decision that says, okay, so the chat, our chat GPT has said, I recommend that we do an XYZ process improvement. Okay, well, I don't know whether that's good, whether that's bad. It's different from what the other consultant says. How do I make a decision? Oh, hang on a minute. And it said, here's the before, during, and after results. Here's the expected outcome. Here's the cost of your process. Here's how long it's going to take. And here's the resources needed. Okay. So whether I agree or disagree with the words conclusion or the PowerPoint slide, I now have data that says, you know what, that's what I'm willing to invest. Therefore, this is the return that I'm going to look to expect. And so the data is what's going to help me as a business manager decide between the options that might be presented.
The question that the challenge that generative AI in the context of process execution brings is how to manage the choice overload. So you're going to get with generative AI faster, more fine-grained, and more unpredictably wrong recommendations that you could get by just getting analysts or consultants to look into your collect data and look into how to improve your process every couple of months. So how do you manage that? Many more recommendations, very fine-grained, continuously coming, and potentially wrong, with a high level of uncertainty behind it. Well, I see only one way of handling that. If you have a computer producing such answers at a high rate, low level of granularity, and high level of uncertainty, you cannot just get humans to look through them. Sorry. You need to have another machine that can validate this machine and can tell you this is going to improve your process in this way. This one is not going to have any effect. This one is likely to get you wrong, and that can explain why it thinks that way, right? And that is a replica of what the generative AI, of what your process looks like. So it's like almost like a ground truth. And what is that thing? Well, it's a digital process twin. Yeah, it's like an oracle to which you can just ask, what will happen if I do this on this group of cases? What will happen in the next week? What will happen in the next month? And that is able to come back and tell you, this is what will happen because this and this and that, and can put numbers behind that. Yeah. And therefore, I think that any technology, any tool, any method that brings in generative AI into a business process improvement use case will need to have and the generative AI and the digital process twins. And one of them of naturally most promising technologies for those what if digital twins is simulation and data-driven simulation. It's taking again the data and using it to derive very fine-grained simulation models capable of capturing the behavior of your human resources, how they multitask, how they prioritize, how they handle stress, high workload, low workload, etc. And also capable of giving you predictions of what will happen in 1 week time, in 2 months time, but also in 1 hour time, in 2 hours time, what we call short-term simulation. And this is an essential component in any operational intelligence toolkit as we move forward with generative AI. Otherwise, you will just get recommendations on do X, Y, Z, heaps of them at a very high rate, and you will not know which ones are right and which ones are wrong. And indeed, you might end up just doing mistakes faster all the time.
It seems that the key to getting, I was going to say great outputs, but given that we've been using outputs in the context of the process, let's say the key to getting great advice from these types of technologies seems to be, and there's plenty being written all over the internet, whether we're looking at ChatGPT, whether we're looking at generating pictures, slides, code, whatever, comes down to actually it's only as good as the prompt. So it seems that at some point or other we're going to see a new job role appearing all across the internet where everyone's going to be advertising that they want GPT prompt writers, because it's suddenly becoming a skill in itself as to how to construct the questions, the prompts, the information in order to get to what you want. And the one thing that I think we can both agree is that most process analysts, business analysts as a whole, don't know how to write the prompts any more than I can't. I struggle to get anything useful beyond simple search engine stuff because I don't want to spend the time to do it. Your average transformation manager, operational excellence leader is no way going to become an expert in writing the prompts. So getting good prompts to get that advice appears to be a pretty crucial piece of the jigsaw. So what is Apromore going to be doing to actually help generate the prompts that are really going to take me to amazing insights to improve my organization?
Yeah. So yes, indeed. So we talk a lot about the output of the AI and this recommendation, but garbage in, garbage out. If you don't give the right prompt, you will not give the right recommendation. And what are the characteristics of the right prompt, particularly when you ask for a recommendation to improve, to intervene in a case or to improve a group of cases in a process? So it needs to be timely. Yeah. you need to be able to give the context of your running cases into the AI. So it needs to be a contextualized. You need to give the context, the organizational context in which you are. Which resources you currently have, which capabilities these resources have, what are their typical performance profiles, how customers have reacted in the past to this and this and these different types of interventions or offers that you are making to them. So you need to be able to provide that information in a way that is highly concise, highly to the point because of the limitations of prompting in generative AI. So you will need some very strong summarization techniques that take your historical data, that take your knowledge base, and that summarize it in the context of a prompt to be able to then ask the AI, what should I do in this particular situation? Should I do this? Should I do that? And that is where that's one of that's a very ripe application use case for process mining, definitely. So we used to think about the output of process mining given to the human analyst to get some insights and generate some decisions. And we are moving already into giving the input of process mining, like the discovering where similar cases have been in the past and where they have been going, discovering what is the status of the resources, summarizing it through a process mining techniques in order to give it as part of the prompt, so that as a manager, you don't need to worry about it. The context of the prompt is generated from process mining, and you just need to focus on formulating your business question and your business constraints around that question. Yeah, and you can focus on that. The corporate knowledge has been fed into by the process mining engine.
Great. And then finally, I've got to ask the question, given that you've been great in sharing lots of information, which is totally useful and usable for people, regardless of what tools and technologies they have in mind, which is always the great part about chatting with you, Marlon, and has been for years. But bringing it back to Apromore specifically, then here's your chance. So how do we look forward to seeing AI technologies being applied and delivered in the Apromore platform over the next 12 to 24 months?
Yeah, so our emphasis is on managing the recommendations. So we have a strong emphasis in the product around digital process twins realized by data-driven simulation, so that you can validate the improvement opportunities that the generative AI is giving to you. You can validate those recommendations, and you can put numbers behind, and you can start making decisions right away with the confidence that these decisions are not going to have undesired side effects. Now, we believe this is the number one prerequisite, right? Sure, you still need to give the right prompt, but at least with the recommendations you get from the generative AI, you can validate them, and you can estimate their impact, and you can prioritize them, and you can manage the potential choice overload and the uncertainty of the generative AI. I think this is the first thing where we are delivering. Yeah, and we are very uniquely placed because of many years of investment into digital process twin discovery from event logs. And the next thing, which I think is less of a bottleneck, but definitely a big enabler in the long term, is to be able to package the outputs of process mining in a way that allows you to formulate effective preambles for prompting. So giving to the AI the right context of your process extracted from the data. so that you as a business user, you can focus as a manager, you can focus on your business questions, which is entirely what we try to do in process mining, is making the business managers, making the analysts be able to focus on their business problems, on their business questions, and not having to worry about all the technical aspects of how do I get this or that out of my databases.
Great. And as I say, for my part, I'm almost more interested to see where you guys go with the data-driven simulation for the monitoring and predictions, because, you know, it's something, as you know, that I understand that the theory of mining is hard and the data and all of those things. But to what we've been talking about today, I'm not sure long term how valuable the mining will be versus the value of the monitoring and the simulation and the prediction. So I think that this is a personal thing, I think we're going to get to the stage where let's call it the process discovery part, is going to be boring. You know, so what? I've discovered it. What do I do next? And we move away from the traditional happy path type analysis, looking at the various cuts and slices and say, you know what? I don't need to do that stuff. What I need to do now is ask the questions and then jump to the simulation engine that says, now I can do the what if analysis. And it says, right, okay, that other stuff was all about building a model. And do I need all of the other visualizations that we've been doing for the last 10 years in process mining? Actually, I don't need those anymore, because actually all I want to do is to ask a question with the context, as you alluded to. And now once I've asked that question, I want to have it go and take the data that it's collected, put it through the simulation engine, and come back to me and say, okay, here's your spreadsheet, here's the current state, here's option 1, option 2, option 3, here's the implications, this one's the cheapest, this one's the fastest, etc., etc. And I didn't need most of the visualizations which we've been working on
Absolutely
to date with process mining. So I think that for me, that's what's exciting about the Apromore platform, is when I look around, it's the only fully integrated mining and simulation engine now. We've got people listening and people know that I've worked with iGraphics. So yes, do I know iGraphics has got simulation and mining? Yes, but they're not totally tightly integrated engines. Do I know that Software AG have both pieces? Yes, of course I do. But I do know what I'm saying when I said, well, actually, to my knowledge, Apromore is the only platform with a fully integrated, tightly coupled mining and simulation engine. So we're not saying it's the only vendor with those pieces, but you guys built it as an integrated piece right from the word go, not bolting best of breed, inverted commas, products together to try and do something.
Yeah. Well, when we launched full life cycle integrated data-driven simulation in Apromore, we launched it into the market, and we put it in the hands of users. At the beginning, it was that it was used as an afterthought. So I discovered the process, I discovered the issues, I see the KPI violations, and I think I make hypotheses that this and this and this can improve my process. And then towards the end of the effort, I do a simulation, right? And we see more and more users saying, like, you know what? I actually have a lot of hunches, a lot of hints coming from my subject matter experts, from my workers, about like, this is the problem and this is the solution, or this is the problem and this is the hypothesis I have, right? And now we see many users just skipping process discovery or doing it, just for the sake of validating, that indeed those problems exist, and then jumping straight into data-driven simulation to test the different hypotheses, the different suggestions they are getting from from the subject matter experts, from the people on the ground, who are telling them this and this and that. So we see more and more use cases where data-driven simulation is the centerpiece of the process improvement effort, as opposed to process discovery. With generative AI, this is to the power of 2. because in addition to all the suggestions that are coming from your subject matter experts, from your field people, you are now getting a supercomputer effectively generating numerous recommendations for you all the time. And therefore, I think data-driven simulation, my prediction is that in 5 years' time, data-driven simulation is going to be the centerpiece of a data-driven process optimization platform. And this is something I share with many other thought leaders in the field. Talk about, for example, my friend Gero Decker, who competes from the Signavio sub side with us. And he will tell you exactly the same thing. In 5 years' time, data-driven optimization is going to be a lot about validating hypotheses, for example, via simulation, and less about finding more hypotheses and more suggestions than what the people on the ground are telling us, or what the generative AI is giving to us.
So brilliant stuff. Listen, Marlon, we're running out of time. I wish you and all the team Apromore the very best of luck, and we'll watch excitedly to see what's coming on. And I'm sure everyone can really appreciate your giving us your time and sharing how you see the AI and process mining work coming together, and some nice, useful cautionary notes in terms of the privacy stuff. So, Marlon, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks to you. This is very exciting times. Of course, we always say it, but now we really mean it. So, AI is taking us to a new level, but it's also challenging us to a new level, and we need to be up to the challenges to be able to leverage the opportunities.
My thanks once again to Marlon. That was fascinating. Marlon, I'm sorry that I talked too much. Hopefully it didn't detract from the words of wisdom that you had to impart, and our viewers and listeners got some insights, ideas that they can act upon. So as we close out the session, then here on screen is a way of reaching out to Apromore. So www.apromore.com, and also take this opportunity to congratulate them on their recent positioning as a leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. And I wish for you, Marlon, Marcello, and all the team at Apromore every success, and I look forward to seeing you again in person very, very soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.